You're going to start in the top left corner of the rack, but before we can get there, we need to turn our scale on. There's two kinds of scales. There's the top and bottom scale, and there's a desk scale. Most everybody will have a 30-pound desk scale or bench scale, but you may also have one of these top and bottom scales. We're going to start with the top and bottom scale. On the side, there's an on-off sticker. If you flip that button under that sticker, the scale will start to power up. What it's doing here is zeroing the scales. So when we do this, we want to make sure that both scales are zero. There's nothing on them before that happens. So if you have stuff on the scale prior to that happening, you're going to have to take it off the scale and restart it. It's asking if we're connected to a second scale. Yes, we are. Hit OK. So the scale has two modes, weigh mode and count mode. We're going to use count mode for everything during physical inventory. So we're going to hit count mode. It gives us the option of top scale only or both scales. For this particular thing, whenever you're working with a larger part, say something around this size, you're probably going to want to use both scales. But if you're dealing with a smaller part, say something around this size, you can get away with just using the top scale. The bottom scale is rated for 250 pounds. So if you've got lighter parts, you want to use the top scale only because it's only rated for 30 pounds. It's got a better accuracy for smaller parts. The same goes with your bench scales. You've got different levels of bench scales ranging from 3 pounds to 30 pounds. It'll have a little, this particular model doesn't, but it'll have a weight somewhere on the front of this scale that tells you what it's rated for. This one is on the side here and it says it's a 6-pound weight. But the ones we get for physical, that weight is outlined on the front of the scale, so it's easy to see. And they're different colors. So again, I mentioned we're going to start at the top left, so I'm going to pull everything I can off of the top left of that rack. We always start by counting the supermarket. That is a yellow or a white card. On the supermarket, at the top, there is a container quantity. If you're confused, it's also on the back of the card with a barcode. That's the quantity we're trying to count to for this supermarket. So this is a bigger part. We're going to use both scales. Do you know the tare weight of your container? So 90% of the time we're going to say no. The only exception will be if you are using a metal tote pan that has the tare weight on the side of the container. Then you'll hit yes. The scale tells you what to do next. Add 10 parts to the top of the scale. If the parts are particularly small, you can change the sample size for a better resolution. You'll be able to tell if you've done it wrong and it's not counting. But generally speaking, 10's a good sample size. Once you've got your 10, hit the count button. Then it wants us to place an empty container on the bottom. Then press tare. Then we want to add some parts to that bottom bin and make sure it's counting properly. So I've added 4 and it's counted nothing. That's telling me that maybe I'm using the wrong scale for this. I'm going to try adding 10 and see if it counts them. So I've added 10 and now it's saying 13. So this scale is the wrong scale for this. So we're going to go back and start over. And this time we're going to use top scale only. Now we'll see that it asks us to place an empty container on the top scale. And then press sample to start. We're gonna add 10 again. And then we'll hit count. Then we're gonna add those 4 and make sure that it goes up to 14. After that, we'll dump the remainder into the bin. So I can see here that we've counted 1,008. But remember, our supermarket was looking for a quantity of 1,000. So I'm gonna take 8 pieces and I've counted those as they came out and watched the count go down. So that's another verify check that this is counting correctly. And those 8 pieces I'm gonna put into the mini market, which I will count next. So the next step is I write the card for this. I only have 1 supermarket bin for this item. So I'm gonna check off super. 1 container. And I have counted 1,000 pieces. I am not gonna put anything in the auditor initials because I am not the auditor. And I don't need to put a comment in this particular card. I'm going to take that card and put it with my supermarket. Then I'm going to use the same bin again, so I'm going to dump those back into the supermarket. Bumped a button. I could have continued counting since I had the same empty bin, but I bumped a button, so we're going to have to start over. So I'm going to add my 10 parts again. That's the 8 I took from the super. The mini market has the same container quantity, but because it's a mini market, we don't need to worry about getting to that container quantity. If we were counting a second super and we came up short like this, we would pull parts from the mini until we got to that container quantity. But we're not, so now we're just gonna fill out a second card for our mini. Again, we're gonna check off, this one's now the mini. We still only have 1 container, and our count is 986. Again, we're gonna transfer these back into the mini market bin, and then we'll get all the cards together. So we wanna take both of our cards, putting the lower numbered card first, and put them in front of our mini market. And then we're gonna take both of our bins and put them back up onto the shelf. Again, the supermarket should not have an inventory card on it at this point. When they're back on the shelf, we can tell it's done because the inventory cards are facing out. We'll then move down the shelf, left to right, and then we'll come back to the next shelf, left to right, until we get to the bottom. Some things to note. When you're counting a shelf, you want to come around the back of the shelf. See if there's any parts on the floor or parts with labels facing the back direction. When you see that, that means that those parts are on this shelf, and these are extra parts that don't fit in their regular location. These particular springs actually belong, right here. So these are extra that don't fit in this location. So the storeroom attendant has put them on the back in an effort to keep them off of the floor, but still have them close by so that when these are used, they can pick them up and put them on there. That happens frequently. You may also see parts on the floor behind the bin. So that's the kind of thing we need to pay attention to make sure that we're counting every part available. These 2 parts as well. They have a location on this rack in 3G, which is up here. So these are extra parts that go along with these parts. So when we're counting these, we want to make sure that these are counted as supermarkets. Our next card has an EXP on the card. That means it's an expense item. Expense items do not need to be counted for physical. If you do count an expense item, no big deal. It doesn't hurt anything. But it does save time to not count it. So if you see the EXP on a card, you can skip it. It's important to note that some cards that say they're from Fastenal and have a green dot are not expense items. So if you do not see the EXP on a card, count it. Some of the parts in a few of the departments have white 2-bin labels instead of Kanban cards. These labels indicate that these parts are stocked in the main warehouse, and the group is no longer using Kanban to reorder them. There is also no supermarket location for these parts in this group. When you see this, you're going to count any bin that has those parts with a single card, and it will be your mini market. These parts are very small and light, so we're going to use a 6-pound bench scale to count these instead of one of the larger scales. Similar to the big scale, there's a sticker on the side that shows where the power switch is. If you flip that switch, the scale will start to boot up. Again, we need to make sure it's empty on top when it's booting, or it won't zero out properly. When we get a 0, that's how we know it's time to start. Step 1 is to take an empty bin and place it on the scale. Then hit sample. It's going to tell you how many to add. If you have a very small part and you need a better resolution, you can hit the change sample button, and that'll increase that sample all the way up to 100. You don't want to use the sample of 5 unless they're fairly large parts, in which case you probably wouldn't be using this scale anyhow. We're going to start with 10, and we can always come back later and fix it. So we've added our sample, and then we hit sample again to start counting. The scale should say 10. Add a couple of pieces to make sure that it's counting properly. Then dump. Because we are counting a mini market without a Kanban card, whatever count we get is the count we're going to get. So we're going to record that down on a piece of paper or a post-it note, or just somewhere for us to know that it's 299. Then we can dump those back using the same bin to count again. We should see that it comes back to 0. Then dump our second bin. Then we can record that count. Using a calculator, we can get the total amount for us to write a card. So then we'll go ahead and write our card. Again, this is a mini market because we only have a mini market whenever we have the white bin label. But we do have 2 containers. Our total count was 682. This card was at the bottom of my rack. So when I'm done with it, I want to put a comment on the card that says finish rack N, because N is the rack that I'm working on. Move to rack O, because rack O is the next rack I'm going to work on. This is going to leave the necessary information for the card scanner to find where the next card in this pack is, so that we don't lose cards and we're scanning cards in order.